The Indian government has embarked on a program to turn the country into a digital economy. It has unveiled a series of initiatives, from introducing digital locker, which eliminates the need for people to carry hard copies of documents issued by the government, to demonetization, which has spurred the use of digital payments across the country. As India's internet outreach goes deeper into the hinterlands, there are security concerns relating to the digital privacy laws, the integrity over the use of big data analytics, the role of artificial intelligence in job growth, and criminal enterprises using the dark web to further their outreach. Other critical national security risks also include the increased use of social media tools for radicalization purposes and the omnipresent risk of cyber warfare becoming a preferred tool among the nation's enemies. Today's episode of India Risk Report seeks to explore these topics and further enlighten on the risks which the cyber domain for the country is vulnerable to.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. And in this report, we are looking at corporate cyber security and crime risk, particularly in the light of the fact that 84% of India's businesses have been victims of security breaches in the last 2 to 3 years. And increasingly, Indian businesses and Indian individuals have been extremely dependent on engaging in business and private activity through the cyber framework. And we have two eminently qualified experts who will throw light not just on the governmental initiatives in this area of cybersecurity, but also how the private sector and the corporate sector would look at it. So we have with us Mr. Bhardwaj, who has formerly been an advisor with the Cabinet Secretariat at the Government of India and has immense understanding of where the governmental initiatives and the rules and regulations concerning cybersecurity are right now and where they would be going. And we also have Mr. Ramachandra Hegde, who is the head of information and security with Genpact. So, Mr. Hegde, I'll ask you the first question. Now, increasingly, all of us seems to be becoming dependent more and more on the use of the net, and the government has also embarked on a program of introducing something called the digital locker. There has been of late a lot of controversy also about how much of information we could be giving out by giving access to officials across the board to our Aadhaar details. And now you have the Facebook scandal, where again data has been going out. So in brief summary, can you clarify that what a regular economy like ours would need from an individual in terms of information, and where the possibility of cyber breaches and cyber security threats exist?
Right. So the answer I would say is, like every use of technology, there are pros and cons. It can be used for good, if it's misused, if it's not well protected, it can be abused and there are ramifications. So it's important to have the right level of balance, to have the right level of transparency, to ensure that any use of technology, that there's a right governance framework and that the right capabilities in terms of controls on disclosure, on choices individuals can make, are all put together in a proper fashion.
Okay. Mr. Bhardwaj, sir, you know, there has been a governmental national cyber security policy that came out in 2013. There was certain amount of applause for that, but there was also criticism of that. One of the criticisms was, if I remember correctly, that while drafting it, the government did not take on board all shades of opinion, particularly the opinion of the public-private sector enterprises that operate more outside the control of the government. And there is an absence of a comprehensive data protection law even now, currently, for the Indian citizen. Now, there are many other laws that are being linked with it, are being looked at. So, can you clear our mind onto what are the legal hurdles that the government is facing in trying to quickly put together a legal framework for an issue as urgent and as important as cybersecurity?
Now, just let me tell at the outset, as usual, Government of India is late starters, and cyber is a field which has taken everyone by storm globally.
Absolutely.
we are late, but we are not behind the best in the world. Having said that, after 2013, considerable amount of initiatives have been taken by Government of India in terms of having a national security coordinator, then setting up the NCIIPC, and so on and so forth. The issue which you have just raised on the laws, we do have this particular at the pole position, and this is of concern to not only us, but many of the other people in the industry and otherwise, and watching us very, very closely. There was just lately the Puttaswamy judgment, after which the Supreme Court had recommended to the Government of India that they should get the act together and come up with a robust policy. Considering the directions of the Supreme Court, what the government has done, it has set up a Sri Krishna committee, a Justice Sri Krishna committee.
Yes.
And they have done very good work and have come up with a draft policy document which particularly addresses the issue of data privacy and the law that should be framed by the Government of India. Now, having said that, what they have done is, the committee has done is, that they have also invited people from outside, like you and me, to come and give our comments.
Very good.
Those comments were to come by end of last year, the December 2017 was the deadline fixed. And I believe many people have put in their inputs. We are all waiting forward to what is the outcome. Hopefully, we will find something very, very good that is coming up in a day or two. And the committee report, let me say, has not only taken inputs from within the country, but it has also taken the best practices in the EU and US and other places.
So, it's very reassuring. I mean, what steps that are being taken, I'm sure, and let's hope that now it doesn't go into another spiral of not finally it becoming mandatorily imposed on companies and others, and we don't keep debating it endlessly and quickly get on with it. But Mr. Hegde, you see, ignorance of corporate security measures is seen to be a widespread problem amongst the corporate employees. And even the senior leadership of corporate concerns are often ill-informed about cyber security issues and threats. And then linked with it is what Mr. Bhardwaj just spoke about, is that there is an urgent need for reviewing the existing data privacy laws in India. Because corporates do tend to need to protect their information. The negative side of it is everything that you do goes on to servers in the US. So, you don't know whether Google and others are passing it on to NSA in the US or not. But what's your take on all this? Do you think that this fear is exaggerated, or do you think that we are, as a country, doing all that we can possibly do to ensure that our corporate data is protected?
Right. So, in summary, I think the fears are not exaggerated. To the first part of your question on awareness, look, end of the day, senior executives run the company and they get risk. And cyber is just another increasingly important risk. So, I think it's important to frame cybersecurity issues in the context of business risk. And it's really up to Chief Information Security Officers and CIOs to make sure that they're doing the balance of protecting the corporation while also, as needed, educating senior leaders and presenting cybersecurity issues in a business and risk concept. And I think once that is done, the awareness, the involvement, all of that gets taken care of. To your second question on data privacy, and particularly for enterprises that run operations globally. So they have to deal with a plethora of different regulations. And I think it's fair for governments to come in and ensure that the rights of citizens are appropriately protected in this digital age. And for the corporation, it can become a balancing act. So I'll just say two things. One, the hope would be that regulations also strike a balance between where you can go too prescriptive and then it can become a distraction. The controls might be a little behind where the risks are in this dynamic scenario. On the other hand, you can become too principles-based where it becomes a lot which is subject to interpretation, which can also lead to a lot of distraction. And the balance also has to be there between what's written in the law and the enforcement of the law. And finally, I think for enterprises, my personal view is that they should just focus on what's right in terms of security for meeting the business objectives and not get distracted by regulations.
Okay, good. I mean, that's a very balanced, comprehensive answer. Mr. Bhardwaj, sir, a quick question, short answer. We're short of time. Being in the government, did you feel that you were probably looking at the landscape of cybersecurity, amongst other things? Did you feel that companies in general, private companies, had an optimism bias where they assumed that all is going well and the chances of them getting hit are few and far between?
Well, I can say from experience, the private sector has been subject to various attacks, but for some reason they have been keeping it away from public knowledge. Let me assure the people from your channel that Government of India has got many agencies there for you. The CERT-In, for example, the NCIPC, they are there to help you. And I will advise the corporate sector to share the attacks, the incidents, so that remedial actions can be put in place. That's all I can say.
Well, that's very well put, because one of the real challenges for dealing with ongoing threats and to put together corrective measures for the future is to understand where we were compromised earlier or in the past. The fear that this would cause an embarrassment to the company or its clients or bring down some of its valuable business initiatives is, I think, a bit misplaced. There can be ways that can be found in a manner of confidentiality to learn from mistakes of the past. But after a break, we'll come back and look at what are the other challenges that we face, both at the national level and at the level of companies, particularly how public-private partnership can work to strengthen India and its cybersecurity responses. But that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two well-informed experts with us, and we're looking at the risk of cybersecurity challenges that we face both at the national level, in the government and in the private sector. And let me go back to you, Mr. Hegde. There is an issue that cryptocurrency has gained attention, and India has recently banned its usage, but it still continues to proliferate. So, where is the real threat that cryptocurrencies pose to the economy as against regular currency?
So I'll answer it from a enterprise perspective as far as cybersecurity is concerned. And the whole evolution of threats from where there were attacks on information or the confidentiality of information to where now it's migrated with the uptick in ransomware, which is partly driven by cryptocurrency. To availability of information, right? And that which drives a focus on making sure you have your backups and you have some of the basic hygiene in place, to now attacks deflecting to cryptocurrency mining, where it's really an attack on computing infrastructure. It's a very good example of how threats in this area evolve, and in response, organizations need to adopt different strategies.
Okay, Mr. Bhardwaj, sir, an area which always looms at the back of our consciousness whenever we look at cyber threats is what is China likely to do? What are China's capacities? There have been statements in the past by Home Secretaries of India to say that we regularly get attacked, governmental websites get regularly attacked. There have been fingers that have been pointed to China. There have also been fingers that have been pointed to China in the event of the malfunctioning of a Sukhoi in Arunachal, a fighter jet of the highest capabilities, and things went completely out of the pilot's control. Why? The Air Force is still trying to come up with an official explanation, at least in public. Unofficially, they must have told you all what they thought was wrong. So, China's capabilities, and linked with that, our own response mechanisms, particularly in the era where so many multiple forces and dimensions to conflict are involved, from insurgency to conventional conflicts, and you being a former Special Forces Army officer, you'd be familiar with that. Then you go on to nuclear conflicts, then you're talking about space and a space command. But there is one issue that sticks out for cyber warfare, and that is the absence of clarity, the inability to pin down the blame on whoever, whether it was the Stuxnet attack on Iran or whether it was other cyber attacks. Now, I mean, what is your broad general view on it in terms of the threats India faces from its neighbors and their cyber capabilities?
Well, let me quote you one example, shadow in the clouds. Shadow in the clouds.
Okay.
Okay, I believe this particular attack was attributable to our adversaries. But eventually, when the Ministry of Defence site had gone down and MHA had gone down for some hours, and there were some error messages with Mandarin written on it, everyone attributed it to the Chinese. However, Government of India came up with a clarification later and said that it is a malfunction in the NIC. But it has caused sufficient alarm in the government machinery. Not that we were not aware of issues and threats that are facing us. So China has gone very, very far as far as cyber is concerned. And as far as we are concerned, we are still debating the need for the cyber space and space command. It is yet to come on the anvil. Having said that, I feel the threat is there. We have to be careful. And suffice to say, we are doing our best in the government to counter such threats.
And if we debate less and get on with putting measures in place, I think we would do the nation a bit more of a favor than in terms of just drafting regulations. But I'll come to that a little later. But Mr. Hegde, there is an issue about public-private cooperation and working together. And can you give any anecdotal example of how progression has been achieved with public-private cooperation outside of India in the area of cybersecurity and cyberspace?
Right. And I think the best way to look at that is to break that up into different dimensions in which you can have cooperation and sharing of information and best practices and so forth. One could be said in terms of just good security baseline measures and controls, where there are a range of standards, there are sectors, specific industry specific standards that have come out, and there's a fair bit of information sharing. The second piece is really on strengthening organizational resilience, which again, in both of these cases, I think organizations won't hesitate to share good practices. The third piece, which is really around threat intelligence and vulnerabilities and so forth. That's an area where I think it gets complicated because there's sensitivity, there is different interests, and sharing information requires a lot of trust because some information which is extremely sensitive in the wrong hands can be misused, and that's where there's a bit of challenge on how do you scale that level of trust and what are the right mechanisms. So I think to summarize in two areas, there are adequate and more examples of good information sharing. The third area will continue to be a challenge.
Okay. Mr. Bhadwar, sir, cybersecurity awareness is still low, both in the corporate sector and even in official circles, Government of India circles. Of course, there are lots of prioritization of security protocols that have to be maintained with correspondence. But, you know, I mean, for instance, some time ago, there was this huge noise about Hillary Clinton having used her private email ID for official correspondence while she was Secretary of State. Likewise, there could be other cases. But in India, are we totally energized in terms of ensuring watertight security of activity in the cyberspace? If yes, happy situation, but if not, what all can be done? Simultaneously, how else can the government create a sense of urgency in us not to give away our information and data as we walk from one place to another while tapping something on our cell phone?
The weakest link is always the people.
Right.
In the complete gambit of cybersecurity. So it all boils down to your education. Well, people of our generation did not see computers till 10 years after we joined. But let me assure you, the generation of today is fully aware of the risk involved. But having said that, government does require to introduce cybersecurity at the school level. Teach it in colleges, teach it at each and every platform. The awareness is lacking, unfortunately, most unfortunately. Perhaps whenever any one of us buys a PC or a laptop or a mobile phone, we can also have a handout of various do's and don'ts, which are put inside the operating instructions. So that will also, some of us may like to glance through it, some of us may not. Now, having said that, I personally feel it is just lack of awareness or carelessness which causes the breaches.
So also there is mention about the Defense Cyber Agency, and a big IT industry giant once mentioned to me in passing that we could create a cyber army too, but for the military, don't put them through the drill square. Is that true?
I don't agree with you. The defense services have their own cyber cells. In fact, that's one place where you can actually implement whatever you would like to. It's easier because you all have disciplined people there. They will follow orders to the dot, right? So putting the defense services through the drill of cyber awareness, cyber security, best practices, do's and don'ts is easier than perhaps in the other sector.
No, but some of the, Mr. Hegde, last quick point. You'd certainly probably agree with the assertion that some of the brightest minds don't want to be disciplined with a shave and a haircut and being standing straight in a queue before they come up with bright solutions.
That's true, and end of the day, it's a matter of risk. And while a lot needs to be done in terms of awareness, it's just there can be gaps between awareness and the actions. So awareness doesn't necessarily translate into actions. So equally, I think efforts have to be focused in making sure not only how do we do a better job at education, but also translating that education into actual actions from employees and citizens, supported by technology. So it really results in an actual change.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your very, very enlightened inputs. But the point really for me that I'm seeking answers to, that why is it that India thumps its chest and calls itself an IT superpower when we can't seem to get our act together to put together stringent measures for cybersecurity? Some of the issues have been brought out by our very learned experts, but I think at the bottom of it all is two or three things. One, as was brought out by Mr. Bhardwaj, that there is a need for widespread education, and it has to start at every level at the earliest. The other, an equally crucial important thing is for us to shed, as Mr. Hegde said, the optimism bias that we have and become more real about the dangers that lurk in the cyberspace, where we are all compromising our information and operating within. But most importantly, I think India must realize that in the scale of threats all over the world, after earthquakes and natural disasters, cyber threats have now been classified as the biggest threat to any society. And we must brace ourselves and prepare ourselves for what looks like to be a very tough future. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.